Hello, everyone. Welcome to our final episode on Grant Morrison X-Men. This is Uncanny Treks. I'm Bob in Cascadia. That's Matt in the Southland, and we are covering New X-Men Volume 7, Here Comes Tomorrow, that ended in 2004. We're looking at issues number 151, 152, 53, and 54. Matt, how you doing this evening?
Doing all right, Bob. Just can't stop staring at that cover of 151. That Wolverine ass.
You love Mark Silvestri drawing Wolverine's butt, right?
Wolverine in a nice pair of jeans, Bob.
Yeah.
Those look like Levi dungarees from Walmart.
It's like, what if Hugh Jackman was a little short and doing a Levi's ad?
Yeah, it's a very interesting look there. I do like the background though, having all the different locales.
So, listeners, this is the interesting epilogue arc for the Morrison New X-Men, art by Mark Silvestri, and it's certainly a choice. I'm not a huge Mark Silvestri Witchblade guy, but he's a 90s legendary artist, right? It certainly gives it a strong visual image. Morrison and Silvestri's take on Days of Future Past, right? But a bit further out. Days of Future Past is what, 15 years
Much
from the
further
present?
along.
This is 150. Honestly, there's a lot going on here. In my notes, I tried to tack what I thought was pretty or interesting, and then Matt pulled some other stuff. We're not going to cover this in a complete way, partially because we don't understand it, or at least I don't feel like I understand it completely, and partially because I don't know if it's really worth going that in depth on.
And there's some stuff we can talk about there too of what was intended and why it is that way. There may have been some things going on behind the scenes, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it's true. So the first thing I was going to bring up, this is in Here Comes Tomorrow, Part 1 in issue 151, is that we have Eva allied with the X-Men in this far future, and she refers to the Sentinels as her ancestors. And I was wondering if you thought she meant that in a general or a specific sense. Does she mean in a general sense, the Sentinels are robots, she's a robot? Or does she mean it in a specific sense of her programming is an advance on Sentinel programming?
The Weapon Plus thing was supposed to be a program to create Super Sentinels, is my understanding. That tracks because they're part of that weapon
Yeah.
program.
And there was an interesting line in the prior arc that I didn't bring up in our episode on Planet X, but Wolverine says something to Jean in the station when they're being burned by the sun about how he found out he was part Sentinel, which I thought was an interesting idea. I'm not sure people had thought of the Weapon X or the Weapon Plus programs in those terms.
And here too, Bob, in this future, of course, it does have that Days of Future Past thing, but you've got Sentinels here, but in this case, this Sentinel's actually on the side of good because this character named Tom Skylark has made a Sentinel as a friend. He calls it
I
Rover.
don't know what you know about this series. I've never read it. There's the early 2000s Marvel series called Sentinel about a boy who Iron Giant style in the Marvel present finds and reprograms the Sentinel.
I did not know this, no.
Given the 150 years, I don't know the kid's name. Probably this is not the same kid, right? Tom Skylark is not that guy. And honestly, his name, I don't know if you remember Tom Swift or Tom Swift. Yeah, his name seems like it's meant to evoke that of your pulp kid scientist character, right?
Okay.
But that's the idea Morrison is drawing from, is trying to come up with an equivalent of the boy and a Sentinel in the same way that was an ongoing series at the same time as Morrison's New X-Men.
A couple of other characters you do have in this future timeline, Bob. You have EVA, or Eva, who's now a humanoid, not a
Yeah,
space.
it's reminding me of Jocasta from the Avengers.
Very much has the same look. You've got Beak, who's this badass Birdman now, but I think it's his son.
Spoilers, listeners, but later this Beak is dying and Wolverine has a conversation with him about how he's even better Beak than his father was.
You've got Wolverine too. Wolverine, of course, is still alive 150 years later. He doesn't die. You've got the three cuckoos.
Which is interesting that this cements that the two cuckoos, the one who died in Riot at Xavier's and Esme who died at the end of Planet X, this cements, at least in this timeline, they stay dead, which I think that remains the case in the main Marvel timeline for about 15 years. Then Krakoa comes and the cuckoos get restored.
Then, Bob, you've got Cassandra Nova. So we've gone full circle.
I had forgotten about Cassandra Nova's alternate future face turn, and this is interesting because this is something that in one of the less popular Krakoa books, the second Marauder series, which I thought was pretty interesting, but people by and large didn't love Steve Orlando's Marauders, but in that book, they do a Cassandra Nova face turn.
This is an interesting crew. Almost as interesting as that Brotherhood we covered a couple of in the last episode.
But a little less the jobbers or the kids than that, the 10th incarnation of the Brotherhood was talked about. So my favorite panel in Here Comes Tomorrow Part 1, Matt, was page 10, where we meet evil Warlord Beast. and he looks like he's from a Sword and Sorcery series or from Jack Kirby's Commandy, right? He's also much literalizing the Book of Revelations or about prophecies about the mark of the beast and what have you. And it was silly, but I enjoyed Silvestri going in on Evil Beast. That was fun.
This costume has a look of Apocalypse, the blue paneling. That may have been what they were going for.
I was also thinking the villain in Thundercats.
Oh, the other thing I wanted to point out is that Beast is creating these crawlers using the same technology from the U-Men. So you got these weird nightcrawler creatures going around bamfing all over the place, but some of them also shoot beams from their eyes or have other X-Men powers. So this is Beast's scientific mind going crazy and trying to create the ultimate mutant.
And this foreshadows a lot of what we'll see Mr. Sinister do in the Kieran Gillen run or in San Francisco, then in the Krakoa run of Mr. Sinister doing mix and match with as many powers as he can. Now that you say that, yeah, it does put me, Evil Beast is working like Sinister here.
I will say, too, that my favorite panel is just the revelation of Beak's son. The look of him. I like the design. This is what you would expect your Birdman to look like if you really wanted to be a Birdman, not the current Beak we have.
Do you remember Northwind from DC?
Vaguely, yes.
He looks like Northwind, who was meant to be the successor to the Golden Age Hawkman. But much cooler, I gotta say. Maybe if I read some Infinity Inc. comics, I might come around on Northwind, but I haven't been a big Northwind fan, but I think Beak is cool here. And it's especially funny after we saw Beak be brave, but take a lot of L's in Planet X, right?
The whole point here, too, I want to emphasize for readers, is that Beast is trying to get a hold of the Phoenix Egg that we mentioned in the last episode.
Yeah, our cliffhanger for Here Comes Tomorrow Part 1 is that we flash back to the present after Planet X, and we see Cyclops visiting Jean's grave, and we see Emma telling him he's being maudlin, telling him that they need to reopen the Xavier School and train the future, right? And Cyclops turns her down. So the implication there, which is going to be made explicit in later issues, is Cyclops turning down Emma and refusing to reopen the Xavier School is what leads to this dark future. Part 2, Here Comes Tomorrow, is issue 152, Matt. We meet a character who was mentioned in the first issue, but I think this is the first time we see him, Apollyon. And obviously we're going with the Book of Revelation stuff, right? We already talked about that with Warlord Beast. But we have Apollyon here. And is Apollyon Phantom X? He looks like Phantom X.
Okay, I had to do some research on this, and he's apparently not. He's just the ultimate U-Man. The guy who's had so many grafts to try to be more like a mutant, but he still feels incomplete.
Do you think the visual similarity is intentional, or is it just, oh, there's only so many ways you can draw a threatening guy in white?
Probably that.
So my favorite panel in part 2 is on page 16, where we have Warlord Beast screaming about the Phoenix Egg. The time of the hatching draws nigh. I've enjoyed that.
That egg's about to hatch. She's going to bust out. My favorite panel, Bob, was Wolverine doing Tai Chi while the Cuckoos are gloom and doom about how the Phoenix is going to end the world.
The Cuckoos got like a Greek chorus thing going this arc, don't they?
They're just signaling to the end of the world.
Our cliffhanger for part 2 is that resurrected Phoenix comes alive, and she mentions the White Hot Room, which I believe also got mentioned in Planet X and is a nice callback to, I don't know if Claremont brought that up in his main run or if that was just something he brought up in the classic X-Men backups back that he went back and added to his original run with. But I thought that was cool that we're tying into this White Hot Room or White Room mythology, which the end of Krakoa will come back to in a big way. And the end of Krakoa makes it feel Twin Peaks. So I always like connections to the White Room. And while Phoenix is mentioning the White Room and Warlord Beast has resurrected her, we find out that Warlord Beast has been possessed by John Sublime.
And you're like, oh, John Sublime, who's that? Oh, that was the dude who broke Emma's nose in Volume 2. And he's the leader.
Yeah.
What do you know about Sublime?
He's a sentient virus, right?
He's a bacteria.
Sentient, my bad.
Anyway.
Kick is John Sublime Eris a lot. You want to explain that retcon then?
If we remember, who was hooked on Kick?
Magneto
was hooked on Kick. So all the stuff that Magneto going crazy, everything going on there, is that really Sublime? Or was that Magneto?
I guess the question is, did Morrison always intend for that to be the case and for there to be the doubt on Magneto's responsibility, or was this, the fan and the editorial reaction was so severe that Morrison was, I have a back door. I'll just blame the kick that's really aerosolized sentient bacteria that made Magneto do this. Beast breaks down and starts using kick because he's under so much stress of trying to run the new Xavier school without Jean. They make a Beast's use of the drug a little bit more sympathetic than Magneto's.
You mentioned something about the White Hot Room. So Twin Peaksy. Have we ever seen a visual of it?
I think we see glimpses of it in those classic X-Men backups, and I think we see it a bit in the end of the Krakoa X-Men and Jerry Duggan and Kieran Gillen's runs. Part 3 of Here Comes Tomorrow, issue 153. I'm just going to go ahead and jump into my favorite panel, which is on page 10, where we see the resurrected Phoenix playing Hamlet with a skull. Even though I don't like Hamlet, it's one of my least favorite Shakespeare plays. I always like seeing people talking to a skull.
This issue, I had a couple of things. My favorite panel was actually Rover, the big sentinel, gets jealous that Tom and Eva they're not kissing or anything. They're looking at each other and seem like maybe they think about each other, they care for each other. Well, he's looking at them, the sentinel, and misses one of the crawlers coming at him with a gun. So he gets knocked over into the water and dies. Sad.
R.I.P. Rover.
Goodbye, Rover.
What was the thing that annoyed you the most about this issue, Matt?
They have a crawler. Beast makes a giant crawler. And you're like, okay, cool. The crawler looks like Beast. Make it not look like a beast.
Maybe the John Sublime has made Beast a narcissist, Matt.
Yeah. Apparently a whale gets shot.
I like the idea that you're triggered by violence against whales. You're like, I cannot read Moby Dick. It is too violent. Matt, the cliffhanger for part 3 of Here Comes Tomorrow is we have Wolverine confronting Phoenix, this resurrected Phoenix that Sublime as Beast brought back. Slightly different look for Phoenix. I would say she looks a little Goblin Queenie.
I dig this look. She's got on leather, high boots, leather gauntlets, and then some sort of leather phoenixy thing to go over her bosoms. Everything else of her is fire. It's all fiery.
Yeah, and the final issue of the Morrison run is Here Comes Tomorrow Part 4. That's issue number 154. My favorite panel comes rather early, and we see Cassandra Nova comforting No Girl. She puts her hand on the jar. And even though No Girl's been a kind of weird and inconsistently handled character in the Morrison run, that was sweet. And a nice little final moment between Cassandra Nova and No Girl before they get got. We see Sublime possess Beast burning Beak. And I thought Matt liked that. Matt really likes when bad things happen to Beak, as we've seen. Well, but also it calls back to way to the beginning of the run where Beak, under the control of Cassandra Nova, beats the hell out of Beast with a bat. But here we've reversed it where now someone is evil possessing Beast and he's doing violence to Beak. So I thought you might like the circularity there.
I love that, but I also love just the image of Beast coming down the way he does with the lightning and just that costume. He changed his costume here, which I thought this one looked way cooler. It's black, makes him look like he's a pro. It's cool looking.
Matt, I wanted to compliment Sandwich, the end of this issue, and by extension, the end of the Morrison run. So I've got 3 observations, 2 positive, 1 negative.
Hit that compliment, Sandwich.
We've talked before in this run about how Morrison is underrated at dialogue. And a lot of times that's because they do relatively simple lines that in context hit hard. And a good example of that, I think, is when Phoenix finally purges or dispels John Sublime. Her line to Sublime is, "Did you think you would live forever, little speck?" Which is a witty line. And it's funny because it works in 2 registers, right? It works on the register of John Sublime, the sentient bacteria, right? He literally is a little speck. But it also works from the perspective of Phoenix as a cosmic entity talking to any of us, the readers, right? Any of the characters, right? They're all just little specks. I like that cosmic perspective the Phoenix brings to purging John Sublime. The criticism is after that, we then see an interdimensional Phoenix Corps. And they don't call it the Phoenix Corps, but I'm going to call it the Phoenix Corps because that's what they're going
that's
for.
That's all I could think of when I saw it.
It really sucks, man.
Lame.
You don't need it. It's especially wrong because even though the Phoenix can have many hosts, and that's cool, right? Having many Phoenixes defeats and diffuses the specialness of the Phoenix.
It makes literally no sense to me at all. It makes no sense.
Different hosts throughout history is fine, but multiple Phoenixes at the same time, pointless.
They all look so stupid too. Their costume, oh my god.
They do. It's bad costume. I think what Morrison is trying to do is trying to call back to the Alan Moore Captain Britain run, which does a Captain Britain core, and I got to be honest, it's pretty lame. And again, I like Alan Moore. I like Alan Moore's Captain Britain, but the Captain Britain core is an idea pretty lame, right? That's what Morrison is trying to pay homage to, but yeah, I don't think it works well. Although I will say, I do the debate that Phoenix has with another Phoenix core member about how she's sniping or snipping off this little weird alternate reality, right? And she's quarantining it and ending it. And that was really interesting because, in a way, it's Morrison writing off this interesting experiment that they had at the end of the run. But in another broader metatextual way, you could also see it as Morrison talking about their whole run and how their whole run is likely to be circumvented, ignored, neglected going forward.
Relates to the ending.
The ending is nice. So at the end, we go back to 150 years before. It's Scott and Emma in the cemetery at Jean's grave after the end of Planet X. In this outcome, Scott tells Emma, no, I'll reopen the school with you, and implicitly I'll be a couple with you, right? And it's interesting because if I remember correctly, in Planet X, Scott said he made a decision between Jean and Emma, but he didn't say who he decided on. Did he always intend to go back to Emma, or was this the force of circumstances has pushed him to Emma? But the last line of the conversation is Scott saying yes to Emma, and ending a book on saying yes is, on the one hand, it's an obvious thing to do, right? It's one of the most basic words in the English language. But you could also maybe see that as a callback to James Joyce's Ulysses, which ends with Molly Bloom saying yes. And she's saying yes, more or less, both because she's accepting a proposal and because she's orgasming. But it's a really interesting note of affirmation to end on. And it's also interesting that it's putting Scott in the kind of feminine position of Molly and saying yes to a more masculine proposition from Emma, which I like the gender dynamics of that too. So as bad as the Phoenix core is, and even though I'm not a super big fan of this arc at the end, there is a lot here that's interesting and does make it an interesting tie-off point for Morrison's whole run.
Yeah, I agree. And we did touch on the whole retconning of the Magneto thing with the kick. And do, do you think this ended the way Morrison intended? Or do you think they were rushed?
It's more likely they were rushed, but I haven't gone back to look at letter columns or interviews. And either way, the retconning more happens in issues immediately after this, that in Claremont's Excalibur, and I think also in Chuck Austen doing a couple issues of New X-Men, which we will, I think, read when we get to the end of the Chuck Austen run. And those issues are bad, but in a way, nobody reads those anymore. Nobody thinks about those anymore. So even if the Morrison run gets its wings clipped a little bit, I don't think it ultimately affects it that much. Matt, real quick on terms of ranking the arcs of the Morrison run, I don't hate Planet X or Here Comes Tomorrow. I don't hate Imperial, but to me, those are the weakest three of the Morrison era. So I would say Assault on Weapon Plus, which is also Murder at the Mansion. Then I would say Riot at Xavier's, then E is for Extinction, then New Worlds, which is catch-alls that Yoda Genosha introduce Phantom X, do a couple other things, introduce Dust, I believe, and then I would go Planet X, then Here Comes Tomorrow, then Imperial. Does that sound about right for you, or would you put Here Comes Tomorrow a bit higher?
I'm good with that because honestly, Here Comes Tomorrow was one of the weaker entries. Yeah, I would put it further down. Where
Some of that is Mark Silvestri's art, while Silvestri's very much doing what Silvestri wants to do, and that's cool, but it's not really my bag. Matt, that brings us to the question of overall rankings of this. So for me, and I want to hear your take on this, but I think this belongs in the top 3 on our list. Currently, listeners, we've got a 37 item list of comics we've read for the podcast, runs of comics we've read for the podcast. And the current top 3 spots are Jack Kirby's FF run. So we've got 87 issues of Jack Kirby on FF. Then we've got the second spot is John Hickman's run on Fantastic Four starting in 2009. And the third spot is a one-shot that Sanford Green and John Hickman did on Doctor Doom. I think that the Morrison run should go above the Hickman Fantastic Four. My argument would be that I think the FF run by Hickman is indebted to this Morrison run. And I comparatively the Morrison run does more to expand X-Men, specifically more to expand the Claremont X-Men, than the Hickman run on Fantastic Four does to expand the Kirby Fantastic Four.
When you look at Morrison versus Hickman, the Morrison run was 43 issues. You had one annual. There was some good stuff. Morrison reinvents the X-Men for the 2000s. They bring in the mutant culture, the Weapon Plus program, a major change to what we grew up with.
It was a big thing, although in a weird way, maybe it's almost a bigger thing for Wolverine and Deadpool than it is the X-Men as a whole.
And secondary mutations, they didn't take off as much.
Had a lot of potential. Your point about the broader mutant culture is great. That's another thing that unfortunately doesn't take off, because pretty shortly after this, you have House of M, right? That curtails that. But yeah, the idea of the X-Men being the front edge of a broader mutant subculture is a cool idea.
One of the bigger great things from the run is just the characterization of Emma Frost, the relationship she has with Jean, with Scott, and that everything that goes down there.
I would be a pedant and point out that Emma was already heroic in Generation X. A lot of people don't remember that series, and definitely this levels up Emma's prominence in the X-Men universe, and she's remained prominent ever since. And like you say, especially establishing this relationship with Scott and this rivalry with Jean is great for the character.
Now, Bob, there's a couple of things that are not as good with the Morrison run, but it's nothing crazy. There's nothing really bad. As we've gone through the issues, the art's been inconsistent.
I agree with you, and there's been a broader range of inconsistent art on the Morrison, from the very good stuff that Frank Quitely was doing and the really good stuff that John Paul Leon was doing, to stuff that's much less to my taste, like Mark Silvestri, or I forget the name of the artist who's the European artist who was doing the early Phantom X stuff. There's a big range, and definitely I don't think there was such a big range on the Hickman FF. But on the other hand, the Hickman FF did have some weak art too.
The ending was a bit of a cluster, with Sublime being revealed. We mentioned it earlier with him being the influence on Magneto and causing that characterization. But that reminded me of what happened with Doctor Doom in the Fantastic Four 1, 2, 3, 4 that Morrison wrote. Same kind of idea that they won't allow them to go too far with it.
Morrison's always hitting the leash of what you can do with big
They have to pump the brakes or make sure there's some way out that can be explained of why that character is not quite the way they're supposed to be. But once again, then we're asking ourselves, is that just how Morrison writes that character?
It is interesting how tonally similar Fantastic Four 1, 2, 3, 4 and New X-Men are. I don't think I really appreciated that before we read them together, right? If listeners want to go back and listen to our short episode on 1, 2, 3, 4, they can.
They really are. Now, let's talk Hickman for a second, the Fantastic Four run. We had 54 issues. You had some good stuff. You've got Reed Richards becomes your central intellectual character in Marvel. He's the smart guy for everything.
Which one could argue Mark Waid already said that, but definitely Hickman way level.
You've got these massive cosmic problems that are accessible to readers, though. That's the thing. Because Hickman's able to tell stories in a way that, even though I had not read every Fantastic Four book up until that point, that was one of the first Fantastic Four books I read. I was able to keep up, and all it's done is made me want to read more Fantastic Four, which now I've gone back and read how much Fantastic Four? A ridiculous amount. But that's thanks.
Just a side note, that was a skill of Hickman's. Is in order to appreciate Hickman's Fantastic Four run, I read a bunch of Fantastic Four. In order to appreciate his X-Men, I went back and read a bunch of X-Men. I haven't read his Ultimate Spider-Man, but I've been reading a bunch of Spider-Man, and one of the reasons to do that is to appreciate his Ultimate Spider-Man.
His work will make you want to go back and read everything about these characters, because he makes them so interesting.
He has such a good idea of making things feel like it's gelling 50 years, 70 years of history. It's funny because that was my big complaint about his Avengers run. Is I read his Avengers run and I felt like, oh, this feels like such a cool synthesis of so much history. Then I went back and I sampled. I didn't read in depth, but I sampled older Avengers, and I was like, oh, yeah, no, Avengers was never anything like this at all.
He just makes it really cool.
Unlike FF, Spider-Man, and X-Men, which were always pretty cool, Avengers was never cool, sorry.
But with Fantastic Four, stuff like the Council of Reeds, the Future Foundation, Franklin's whole characterization, Doom, the way he writes Doom, Galactus, anything dealing with multiverses. There's so many great things there, okay?
Men are about the only ones I can take doing multiverse stuff. Most other writers, when they do multiverse stuff, I just shy away. Even writers I sometimes like Mark Waid and Dan Slott, when they go multiversal, I tend to just ignore it.
The not so good stuff, which I'm saying, there's nothing bad. His character's not as emotional as Morrison's. I don't feel like you're getting as in depth with some of those characters as you would with Morrison's.
A common complaint about Hickman is that maybe he has the same voice for a lot of characters some people find, and also people maybe find his characters a little over intellectualized.
You have to really think sometimes when Reed's talking. But the other thing, too, is I never felt like in the Fantastic Four that there was this sense of danger for any of the characters at all. I never felt like anybody was going to die. Even though some do die, I knew nothing really bad was going to happen. Maybe that's because it's a family, the way it's written.
Hickman doesn't want to be a hack and threaten the kids, right?
With Morrison, you never know what's going to happen.
Morrison in Justice League of America, Morrison in All-Star Superman, and especially Morrison in New X-Men, they're good at giving an apocalyptic sensibility to their runs. That's true in Batman and Batman Inc. as well, now that I think about it.
Oh, I agree. There's things at stake for the characters, and it could potentially change them forever. Whereas with the Fantastic Four and Hickman, you always knew they were going to go back to the beginning and reset. I think we even talked about that when we were doing the Hickman stuff. It's back to the status quo, but we went on an incredible ride. We went on the best ride ever, but we got to go back to what happened before. So that's my thing with Hickman.
It sounds like you agree with me that Morrison New X-Men goes above Hickman Fantastic Four.
I'm in agreement that Morrison can go above Hickman for that. Now, the question you posed, you said top three. We're talking about Kirby and Stan Lee at the top, number one. Yeah. So far, what we've covered for the podcast, we did the first 88 issues of Fantastic Four, along with the 6 annuals. Okay?
Might have just been the first 87, but yeah.
We're introduced to the first family of Marvel. You've got Black Panther. There's another amazing character that's stood the test of time. The Inhumans were introduced in this run. They're awesome. Silver Surfer, incredible character, was introduced in this run. Galactus, who Hickman could do nothing without, introduced in this run. Doctor Doom, introduced in this run. The Negative Zone, introduced in this run. The Kree, the Skrulls, that cosmic tone to the Marvel universe. Now, the not so good, which part of it is the time it was created, and part of it is just was available.
And we talked a lot about the sexism to Sue at the time, which is a real issue.
There's inconsistent storytelling and artwork throughout the whole run.
I would refine that slightly. I don't think the art is inconsistent. The art is Kirby the whole way through, and that's great the whole way through. The artwork, that is. In terms of art, I'm not saying that there aren't better artists than Kirby. There are. But the art, we've said, is sometimes on Morrison X-Men and sometimes on Hickman Fantastic Four a liability. And I don't think on the Kirby run of FF, the art is ever a liability in the same way that it is sometimes on the Morrison and Hickman runs. Now, I will agree with you that Stan and Jack are not always communicating well.
Right.
And the dialogue is not always serving the art well.
Correct.
So I agree with you, there's some issues there.
The artwork is beautiful.
I think the debate is, on the one hand, Kirby FF creates the Marvel Universe and has beautiful art mostly through. Then, on the other hand, the Kirby FF does lose its way at a couple points narratively. Things like the Inhuman saga maybe get stretched out a bit too much. You do a bit too many stories of Ben has to choose whether or not he's going to become the Thing again. And in contrast to that, the Morrison run on X-Men is way more focused, and I would say it's way more wild, right? Now, granted, that's wild from a 21st century perspective. The FF was pretty wild from a 60s perspective.
Right. Going back to what you said about FF, you are going to see some repeat type stories. Some of the same villains come back over and over again. You get that character of the week type thing.
Whereas when Morrison does repetitions in their X-Men run, they're more interesting thematic repetitions. The Phoenix resurrecting, or like Beak and Beast trading off beatdowns while possessed, right? It's a little bit more intentional. So if you're doing it based on influence, you got to give it to Kirby FF, I think. But if you're going to do it based off overall effect, I could see arguments for either.
That's where I'm stuck. Hickman's definitely the number 3.
Can I raise one other line of argument I didn't put in the notes to see if it unsticks anything for you?
Sure.
It's thinkable that we might put Hickman X-Men above all of this stuff. I definitely think it's thinkable that if we do more Morrison, I'm not sure, but there's a lot of quality Morrison, and I could definitely see All-Star Superman or JLA or Batman going above the new X-Men run. I'm not sure if I would say that, but I could see that. So this may not be the highest that Morrison is going to appear on the list, and this may not be the highest Hickman is going to appear on the list. But I don't think that, even though there's a lot of Kirby stuff that I love, and I want to do more Kirby stuff, I don't think we're ever going to get another Kirby thing as high as this.
So you don't think anything at the top is Fantastic Four?
That he does.
That he does, yeah.
That might not be a persuasive argument, but it might be an argument for keeping Kirby #1 and Morrison X-Men #2, because Morrison and Hickman are going to have other opportunities to get to the #1 spot. As much as I love Devil Dinosaur and Black Panther, none of that's going to.
No.
And we saw what we thought of Avengers.
Avengers
right?
and the X-Men, yeah. Okay, I'm good with that, Bob, because I really do feel like, in just the sheer history of the Kirby Lee piece, everything I was, just the idea that someone created those things, they weren't there before, that speaks a lot too to this. So when I think about the list, and Morrison did something, Morrison's reinvention of the X-Men, do you think they saved the X-Men possibly? Maybe
they gave the X-Men an energy that was really,
gave them a boost of energy. I just feel like in the early 90s with the Jim Lee stuff, that was a shot that they needed in the arm then. But then when Morrison comes along, it's another shot in the arm. Who provides the shot in 2010?
Definitely Kieran Gillen and Jason Aaron.
Then you go further, and you've got Jonathan Hickman 10 years later.
And Gillen coming back around to help finish out.
What was that meme the other day? The one about it takes 10 years for the X-Men to realize they had that weirdo to go back and write it. It's very true.
Listeners, I think we've settled it. Then we're going to keep the first 87 issues and 6 annuals, was it, of Fantastic Four at the top for now. But Morrison and Hickman always could take that spot, right? Then we'll do Morrison's new X-Men at #2. We'll keep Hickman's Fantastic Four at #3. We're going to keep going. We're going to kind of go back in time a little bit and look at the Uncanny X-Men that was running parallel and much worse than New X-Men.
It's still an interesting read.
We think it's bad comics, but it's interesting comics, and it's kind of funny. We finally broke up the 3 Fantastic Four comics at the top of our list, right? And we're finally going to break up the 3 Gotham Knights comics probably at the bottom of our list with some of this other early odds X-Men. And then I think from there, we'll probably try to keep going, right? We'll try to do some Peter Milligan, do some Warren Ellis Next Wave, keep going to see the strange stuff. Definitely, I hate it, but we'll definitely have to do Joss Whedon Astonishing X-Men, right?
For listeners who've been listening for a while now, I know that beginning of last year, it's been a while, we began our coverage of Hush 2. And Bob, recent release of the newest issue of Hush dropped.
I guess I have a question for you, which we can ask on air, Matt. Hey, is there enough to talk about in this recent issue of Hattush? I'm not saying there is or isn't. I'm just going
to tell you this, Bob. If we were to add it to our list, it would be at the very bottom. I finally found an issue that is way worse than AJ Lieberman. And where did we put the original Hush? That's my question. Hold on. On our list, we placed the original Hush. It's on number 15.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember we had a discussion when we did the original coverage of Hush, and we said if Hush 2 was released and we covered it and it was really bad, we would go back and reconsider where we put Hush?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, I am good with that because I don't like Jeff Loeb being so high on our list now. I am not happy with that man.
But counterpoint, it's not done.
I don't care. It's never going to get done. It's never. God, it's so bad though. Jeez. I'm serious. Well, listeners, I know this is not X-Men related. If you want to read a horrible comic.
So listeners, the next thing we're going to record on is Uncanny X-Men X-Corps is the trade. So Uncanny X-Men X-Corps. That's what we're going to talk about next. Joe Casey is the writer. Sean Phillips is the main artist, although there's a lot of artists. And Sean Phillips is a good artist. I love Sean Phillips. Matt, if you want, we can also record a short episode on Hattush, the end of Hattush, where we revisit where it's ranked. If you want to do that, we could also do that this Saturday.
I think we should do that, Bob. I really do. I think we should. Right, that's a great idea because there's not enough to talk about in this. I'm going to put, I wish you could see in quotation mark, comic that was released today.
All right. The bottom of the list is going to get filled out. It was just Gotham Knight stuff, which did belong down, but some of it maybe didn't belong as far down as it got. So, all right, listeners, join us next time for Uncanny X-Men X-Core. Join us for our wrap up of maybe all the Hattush we're ever going to get, because Matt is probably right that we're never going to see Hattush
Yeah,
again.
I wouldn't even be willing to pick it up, I don't think. We've read all the Hush, Bob. All the Hush.
Yeah. We read all the Hush in it. I don't know if anticipation is the right word, but in anticipation of Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee reuniting for Hattush. Oh, man. Listeners, thank you for joining us with this epic Grant Morrison X-Men run. It was a real pleasure to go through one of the major X-Men runs. And I think we're going to not do everything, but we're going to keep going and try to hit some of the highest points and some of the lowest points of X-Men in the 21st century. So I think that'll be a fun little project for the podcast for the next few months.
Sounds great, Bob. And also don't forget that X-Men 97 is coming out July 1st.
Oh, we got a release date now.
Season 2.
Awesome. Looking forward to covering that. All right. Well, I am Bob in Cascadia. That is Matt in the Southland. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks for listening.